coming up, meat has historically had a special role in global cultures. And for some men, whom one study says attribute their masculinity to this prized and sacred food.
Well, there's the false belief that meat's necessary to build muscles, and men are usually more interested in building muscles than women are.
But pressure to reduce consumption is changing age-old norms.
Well, there's a variety of good reasons not to eat meat. One is that it's one of the main contributors to climate change.
We look into the heat waves happening concurrently across parts of the Northern Hemisphere, and from music to manure, a British pop star talks about his passion for produce and the threats global warming poses to local farms.
This year, for instance, we've had a very wet spring. We're going into a very wet summer. Statistically, it's probably been one of the wettest summers that we've had for a very long time.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now,
we're able to actually manage what we have when we have an abundance of it, and actually when we don't have an abundance of it, we're not trying to force or push the envelope in order to make sure that we're still producing.
Stripes and stars made it, all spare parts. We hit skulls and cars doing 25, 25. In a sense, they hit Texaco fading.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Jaden Smith, Pharrell Williams, and Mark Ruffalo, all acclaimed artists you probably know. But they also share a cause, defending the environment. The list of celebrities talking about the climate crisis is growing. Let's add another.
But to my satisfaction, baby, you are more than just a friend.
And if I ever fall in love so true.
That was the British boy band JLS, who shot to fame in 2008 after performing on The X Factor.
I thought that was absolutely terrific. And, agreeing with the girls, individually you've all got great voices, particularly you. I like your voice a lot. I am very, very happy with you lot.
Well, since then, they've soared to the top of the UK charts multiple times. One of the band's members is juggling the mic and, get this, milking cows. JB Gill launched a second career as a farmer in 2012. He wants to shine the spotlight on sustainable food production.
So who have we got here?
My name's JB.
Aston.
I'm Arishay. I'm Marvin.
Back in 2008, these 4 young men took their dreams to the 5th season of Britain's music competition X Factor.
Your lips said hello, and I said hi.
Although they narrowly missed the winner's spot, their infectious energy and vocal prowess left a mark. They've gone on to sell millions of records and play to sold-out arenas. But it hasn't been an easy road for the band.
And so we set the bar so high, we were like, you know what, we've got to come back this year even stronger.
After failing to break into the American market, JLS separated in 2013.
You guys are splitting up.
I know. Well, it's been 7 years and it's about that time for us. We wanted to focus on different individual things, and we've had a brilliant career, fantastic time. We're looking forward to the next phase.
After 7 years, the guys reunited for a concert tour across the UK. In the interim, one member was working on an unexpected new career path.
Yeah, well, when we finish doing all the JLS stuff, I'm going to be straight on to Turkey. So
trading in the bright lights of fame for something entirely different.
So for me, I've made it one of my aims to educate wherever I can, to educate myself, but also to pass that on. I've got a little boy now, Ace, and I think it's really important for him to be immersed in the countryside lifestyle wherever possible, and to understand, the origins of his food and to be passionate about that. And I think the more support that we can give to the farming community, the more support we can give to people and knowledge to people about the farming community.
JB and his wife Chloe purchased a 5-hectare farm in Kent, and it's got everything: pear, cherry, and apple trees, and a menagerie of animals: pigs, chickens, and turkeys.
Running the farm and music and entertainment don't really fit. No, I mean, it is a struggle, and it's something that I've tried to balance as best as I can. It is tough. Farming is a difficult industry, it's a difficult environment, and we do have to try and bridge the gap as much as we possibly can, especially because it's effectively myself and my wife Chloe who run the farm. But at the same time, it's a challenge that we relish. You know, we want to be hands-on. We've always wanted to be hands-on. We want to learn this industry.
Through farming, JB hopes he can turn his passion for sustainable produce into practice and capitalize on the concerns Brits have about consuming ethically sourced foods. Whether under the stage lights or in the quiet of the countryside, his journey continues to inspire.
And JB took time out of his busy schedule to chat with us.
Jonathan, before we start, I have an icebreaker for you.
Go on.
Very serious question, my friend. On Google's top 50 facts about you, it says you like standing next to a window, look upon the horizon and put lotion on yourself. True or false?
That's false. I've been very much stitched up by one of the boys in JLS because basically I can't remember what it was, but there was a time, of course, in the X Factor where we would have been sharing a room. You know, and throughout that process, of course, you know, I've shared multiple rooms with the boys over the years, as you do, especially when you're in the, you know, in the beginning stages of your dream, so to speak. And I'm notoriously not a morning person. So, you know, I probably slipped into a bit of a trance while I happened to be creaming in front of a window, looking outside of it. But it's not one of my top favorite things to do, though.
All right, noted. All right, so I also had a good time looking back at old videos of you on the TV series Down on the Farm. You've obviously been entrenched in farming for many years. When you observe the effects of global warming and pollution, can you say whether farming in the UK is as easy as it used to be?
You know, over those years, you know, I've genuinely found that every single year is completely different. You know, one year you get an incredibly warm spring, and obviously that has a knock-on effect sometimes going into what's being produced into the summer. Sometimes you get an incredibly warm summer, and again, you know, some farmers and producers and growers struggle then to feed some of their livestock, perhaps, or you know, to look after some of the crops that they're growing. Similarly, you can see adverse weather affect it in a different way. You know, so this year, for instance, you know, we've had a very wet spring, we're going into a very wet summer. You know, statistically, it's probably been one of the wettest summers that we've had for a very long time. You know, and that
Does
will
that
have a
negatively impact your farm when it's too wet?
Not a great deal for us, to be honest. But what it does impact is it impacts what's produced. So we grow apples, pears, and cherries here. And already this year, you know, we usually would have had cherries, you know, quite in abundance actually, sort of through April into May. And we've not really had much growth at all, and that's because of the climate. You know, we've had quite a cold spring, quite a wet start to summer. You know, and that will have a knock-on effect, of course, again for our apples and for our pears, which will come later in the year, towards October and November.
You've also had a book, Ace and the Animal Heroes, I think for anyone who loves farm animals. What are your thoughts? Because I'm not too sure if you do this on your farm, but what are your thoughts about raising livestock for food?
Well, I think, you know, we have a huge demand for food here in the UK, you know, and there's no doubt that, of course, you know, we all need protein to live. And one of the main sources of that protein is through animal protein. You know, whatever that might be, whether that's lamb, pork, beef, you know, we have a number here in the UK, you know, and I think, you know, for me personally, if you are going to consume meat, you know, and of course there are people who for lots of different reasons don't want to do that. But if you are going to, you know, it's important to understand where that food comes from. And that's always been my overriding, you know, focus and overriding conversation, you know, and similarly, you know, I think you've got to look at some of the retailers and other consumers and what their attitudes are. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why, you know, the responsible retailing report that Co-op have produced, which is published today, have wanted to do that because, like you say, I'm sure you're alluding to, you know, that our consciousness has changed over the years, you know, and people have many different priorities and are starting to think about things like sustainability, things like seasonality, things like the impact that their food and the consumption of their food has on the environment, and they're all valid conversations to have. And you know, I think once, you know, with research like that, it's it's great for, of course, a retailer like Co-op who seem to be leading the way for that, to be able to share that information and actually change their habits and the things that they do to produce and to sell their food, but also for consumers like, you know, ourselves who go into a retailer and make choices about what we want to do, what we want to choose. In terms of producing livestock, of course we do it for a Christmas market with our turkeys, and we have produced Tamworth pork over the years as well, that we've been farming here. You know, for me, the biggest thing has always been about, firstly, if we're going to do it, we have to do it ethically. If we're going to do it, we have to make sure that it looks after our environment. If we're going to do it, we have to understand fully everything that goes into it, you know, and shows like Down on the Farm and Springtime on the Farm and other farm shows that I've been involved with, you know, aren't shy about talking about that, talking about where our food comes from and how we get it to our plates.
So with the carbon and methane emissions linked to the meat industry, mass deforestation and land and ocean pollution based on where these farmers are, how do you ensure that your farm is sustainable and protects the planet?
Well, I think one of for every farm, really, one of the biggest things is to be able to try and showcase actually what goes on, you know, because the reality, although we talk obviously about the negative and we have to be in order to be able to highlight that and to be able to change it, actually here in the UK, we farm incredibly sustainably and incredibly ethically when you consider the global population. And across the world, you know, the UK definitely has one of, if not the, has one of, if not the highest standards across the world. You know, so I think that that's definitely to be celebrated. You know, I think for me, having that conversation and being able to showcase that, whether it's through popular shows, you know, shows like Clarkson's Farm, you know, and Springtime on the Farm, as I say, you know, show firsthand exactly what goes into farming.
Springtime is a really important time for getting the soil ready for growing. This great big machine is called a seed bed former that gets the soil in the beds ready for the seeds to go in. Once the soil is ploughed, it's time for planting. On a farm, this is done using a tractor, and today we're planting cabbages.
Farmers, as the growers, as the producers, as almost the first port of call, you know, very influential. You know, and firstly, the fact that they're able to have the conversation. You know, I've spoken to a number of farmers over the years, and it's not always an easy thing for them to do. You know, their skill and their gift is being on the land and nurturing that and producing and growing whatever it is that they grow. But actually, you know, if they're able to speak out more about what they're doing and the impact that they're having, and then some of the difficulties even that they might be going through, actually it goes a long way because people are able to understand more. At the end of the day, our society, especially in this day and age, only really pay attention to things that are popular. You know, and if you're able to bring information to light, you know, things like Co-op's responsible retailing a report, you know, and bring it into the public's consciousness, actually then that's a forum for debate, a forum for conversation, and ultimately a forum for change.
Do you eat meat? If yes, have you ever asked yourself why? Most people would say they simply like the taste, but a new study is shedding light on how gender and culture influence our consumption habits, more specifically a man's. The researchers analyzed men from 23 countries on 4 continents to test 3 hypotheses about meat consumption, namely whether there were basic dietary differences between men and women, whether meat consumption was influenced by cultural norms, like the perception of what makes a man masculine, and whether those dietary habits were influenced by social factors like gender equality and wealth.
Steak, that's what a man eats. Made from stuff guys need. Eat like a man, man.
There's no one that can relate to that better than I do because I've lived in that world. Steak is for man.
Go meat!
They showed us commercials, burgers, George Foreman with the grill.
Yeah.
And then big sandwiches and all that stuff.
Eat like a man and be full like a man.
This is great marketing by the meat industry.
Serious man food.
Selling that idea that real men eat meat.
You look like more of a man with a quarter-pounder in your hand.
But you got to understand, that's marketing.
This notion of meat and masculinity has been around forever. Both men and women associate the more meat you eat, the more masculine you are perceived to be.
We tracked down the lead researcher on the study, Professor Christopher Hopwood.
Do men need more protein than women? And I'm referring to men who aren't trying to bulk at the gym, that is.
I'm not a nutritionist, but there's no evidence that I know of that's reliable that suggests that men need more protein than women necessarily. There are times in life when people need protein, particularly early in life. Infants need protein more than adults. It's also the case that there's many ways to get protein. Animals are one way, but there's many other ways to get protein as well.
And there's the perception that meat eating is more masculine, as you talked about in the study. Where does that belief come from?
Well, there's no evidence that men need more meat than women. And in fact, for most of human history, most people, men and women, didn't eat animals. There is consistent evidence that in modern times, men tend to eat more meat than women when given the choice. It's possible that there are biological reasons for this. For example, there's evolutionary theories that suggest that women may have avoided eating meat when their immune systems were down, for example, during menstruation and pregnancy, and therefore been more likely to survive, and had therefore been selected to be less likely to eat meat. It's more likely in modern times that the difference is cultural. In many places, meat is associated with masculinity for cultural, religious, personal, other kinds of reasons. For example, there's the false belief that you sort of started with that meat's necessary to build muscles, and men are usually more interested in building muscles than women are. So my best guess, and I think the best available evidence, is that this is a cultural factor more than a biological one.
Yeah, you talk about the old cultures there. In many old cultures, meat was consumed on special occasions. Even today, we have huge meat spreads, particularly on holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving. But while meat is, I think, more expensive in most places than fruits and vegetables, I'm not sure it's unaffordable. So do you think eating meat is more about fulfilling perceived class and status requirements than it is about wealth?
There are places where it's difficult to, this varies a lot across the world. There are, of course, places where it's difficult to find high quality food in general, particularly high quality alternative proteins, vegetables, fruits, etc. There are also places where it's difficult to find meat that's affordable. Just it depends on where people live. In general, it seems like throughout the world, the wealthier countries consume more meat, and within countries, people who have more wealth tend to consume more meat.
Chris, do you eat meat?
No.
Oh, why not?
Well, there's a variety of good reasons not to eat meat. One is that it's one of the main contributors to climate change. It increases risk for zoonotic disease. And of course, animal rights is also an important factor to many people.
I'm curious about whether or not you've asked anyone close to you if they eat meat and why they do that. Have you got any answers to that question?
Yeah, this is a great question. I always get the question, why don't you eat meat? And I always think the question should be reversed. Why do you eat animals? To me is a more reasonable question. This is actually something that we study in our lab. The main reasons people give for not eating meat are environmental, health, and animal rights reasons. And the main reasons people give for eating meat are what's called the 4 Ns. And those are the first one, that it's natural. Humans are sort of made to eat meat. Our teeth and our digestive systems are developed to be omnivores. The second is that it's normal. Many people do it. It's common throughout the world. The third is that it's necessary. This is the one that's demonstrably not true, that eating meat is healthier. And the fourth is perhaps the easiest to defend, which is that it tastes good. It's nice.
I will have a bit of steak just to...
You didn't salt it, though.
You see, all you've achieved is you've made me want to do this. Just eat a lovely...
absolutely fine. You go for it.
Do you know how many steaks he's had from my restaurant?
Yeah, a lot. But here's my point. I love eating steak. I'm not going to stop eating steak.
Yeah.
And the very last thing on earth that will stop me eating steak is people like you with your pasty faces running into our restaurants telling us to stop eating steak.
Based on cultural norms and the conversation, how they go these days, I get the impression that vegan men are considered less masculine because they don't eat meat. Do you think this stereotype prevents the regular guy who does eat meat from making small changes that benefit the environment?
It's very likely. I mean, there are vegan bodybuilders that would beg to differ with the idea that vegan men are somehow weak. There's plenty of ways to grow muscle without eating animals. But I do think that many men feel social pressure to eat meat. Of course, this is changing. There's many fairly well-known athletes who are adopting vegan diets to extend their careers. So I think the nutrition, the public perception are kind of not on the same page.
Man needs meat. Paddle boarders especially need meat, so they can paddle back against the offshore breeze that's blown them halfway to Hawaii. We recommend the new Jack Link's chili and lime, spicy enough to make you thirsty for land. And the lime? Well, that could fight scurvy. Jack Link's and its handy waterproof packet is perfect for such voyages. Just don't let the sharks smell it. Jack Link's, feed your wild side.
Your research indicated 3 exceptions to the study, namely in China, Indonesia, and India. In those countries, I'm wondering if women eat more meat than men, or is the consumption about the same between the genders?
In our particular study, consumption rates were about the same across the genders. There's other research in each of those countries that suggests that men eat more meat than women. So it could be that every time you do multiple studies, you get different results here and there. My guess is that men eating more meat is a pretty universal phenomenon, but the difference, I mean, the main finding of our study was that the difference is smaller in countries that are less economically developed, and those 3 would be included in that group.
So, Chris, what is the aim of your study? What are you hoping people take away from this? And are you trying to influence consumption habits?
In this study, we weren't trying to influence consumption habits. Certainly, people who do advocacy would be interested in the results of this study because it implies that you might need different strategies depending on things like gender or culture to effectively reduce meat consumption. Our main question had to do with whether the relationship between gender and meat consumption depended on culture. And you might expect that in places where gender equality is higher, that behavior among men and women would be more similar. This is kind of an intuitive expectation. So what we found most interesting is exactly the opposite effect was the case, that in countries where the genders are treated more equally in general by law, et cetera, actually the gender differences in meat consumption were bigger, which suggested to us that in places where people are more free to make their own consumption choices, the gender differences that may be natural, cultural, whatever, tend to increase.
There are so many heat waves happening across the world, it's hard keeping up, right? It's been so hot in the US. People in the state of Nevada have been advised not to rely on fans to stay cool, but to seek shelter in air-conditioned places like shopping malls and cooling centers. In June, the US experienced one of its hottest ever weeks. And for states from Iowa to Maine, the longest heat wave in decades. Far east in China, an extreme heat warning was put in place in the capital, Beijing. The orange alert is the 2nd highest level in the 4-tier system. And over 500 people have been killed by high temperatures in Saudi Arabia while taking part in the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. Keep in mind, at the time all this is happening, summer hadn't even begun.
So, climate change is making everything hotter. And then you add on top of that the fact that summers are always hot. And so we can expect a hotter than normal summer. So it's going to be very hot.
Well, staying cool is essential for our well-being. I spoke with Jose Silva at the Portuguese Institute of the Sea and Atmosphere about how to stay safe during the summer months.
During a heat wave, we have a subsidence of warm air over a region, and this also leads to a decrease in terms of soil moisture and exacerbation of an ongoing drought situation. But it's not always the case, so we can have some situations where we have good conditions in terms of soil moisture, and we can see the heat wave developing over such a region due to the transport of warm air from other region. So this is what we usually see.
Do you think because heat waves are getting longer and becoming more frequent, we will see deserts start spreading across the world?
With heat waves, we can also see increasing evaporation and water demand from the atmosphere. So we also see the exacerbation of drought conditions. So it may contribute, and for sure will contribute to development of more arid climate and the progression of arid climate type over certain regions, but this is just a piece of all the conditions that are needed for that to happen. So we need this long-term trend, not only in terms of increasing temperature, but also in terms of decreasing rainfall amount over a certain area, so that the aridity can become more prevalent over a region. So the aridity means that we are not having more rain or during a long-term period. So because it's different from drought. Drought, it's a component of climate variability, but aridity is also something different. In means that certain region we have no rain, we have no vegetation.
And that's our show. But before I leave you, The Great Migration of Life is a documentary that premiered in June. It's a glimpse into how human-induced climate change interferes with the migratory patterns of sardines, dolphins, sharks, and other marine species. UNESCO puts it this way: with sea life being disrupted and harmed by pollution and acidification, we've been treating our oceans like a free-for-all.